Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Ray the Flying Squirrel here, and I am from the likes of the Maxi Toys videos here. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next The Legend of Zelda Let's Play for our channel, and this time we're going on to The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening again, except this time, as you can tell, about the fact that we are now tackling through a remake of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. But this time around though, is going to be on the glorious Nintendo Switch. So obviously that was about the fact that The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening did originally came out in 1993 for the Game Boy, and eventually later on in 1998 for the Game Boy Color, known as The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX, and now we're on to the forms of the most recent remake at the time, that's of course The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening for the Nintendo Switch. First came out in 2019 to go alongside with the actual specific release of not just by the forms of some bunch of more games coming out on the Nintendo Switch during that time, but also this particular game did came out the exact same time as in the Nintendo Switch Lite, which is obviously it's like a lighter version of the Nintendo Switch with no detachable Joy-Cons, and you probably need the rest, thus you can only play the actual Nintendo Switch Lite on handheld mode, so unfortunately you can't play that particular device on TV mode. So anyway, so I'm actually really looking forward to doing this game for you guys, especially it's been like quite a few months ago since we've last done the Zelda Let's Play, ever since in, oh god, the previous Zelda Let's Play we done is without a doubt is the hardest Zelda game we've already tackled through, thanks to Silver the Hedgehog did somehow tackle for that game. That's of course Zelda 2 The Adventure of Link for the NES. So for now on though, we're about to be finally going back onto the top-down Zelda game perspective game. So because of that, now basically though is about the fact that, like I said before, this game right here is basically a remake of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. Did originally came out on the Game Boy / Game Boy Color, but there are some new differences that you might actually realize, is that when you boot up the game, that you're able to actually see this gloriously really well animated cutscene. Alongside with that, the game's visual style is actually now in chibi style, and on top of all that stuff though, there are some new additions to the table. Like for instance, if you go into the file selection screen as you saw from earlier, basically though if you jump right into new game, you actually have a choice between two different difficulties this time around. So there's normal mode as well as hero mode, where basically though normal mode plays pretty much exactly like the defaults of how it does it back on the Game Boy version, except the fact that obviously though there are some other improvements which I'll get into more about it later. And on top of all that stuff though is about the fact that when it comes to hero mode, basically it's more like hard mode basically, where basically though if you get hit by certain hazards or enemies, obviously though you deal twice the amount of damage if you get hit. So as a result, the playthrough I'm going to be going through is of course normal mode. So because of that though, because I'm up for the actual relaxed run experience, so either way, of course, my name is obviously Ray, so let's jump right into The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening for the Nintendo Switch version. So, and obviously you probably already know about the fact that recently though, Maxi is now onto Luigi's Mansion 2, ever since in yesterday. For those of you who want to check it out, then you can. So obviously though is about the fact that the game's visual presentation is actually a massive upgrade compared to the forms of how it does it on the Game Boy version. Like, for instance, every single character models are now in 3D as opposed to sprites, and on top of that, you can now able to actually go through in-game text dialogue much quicker this time around by simply pressing the B button. So, although obviously the main core gameplay remains the same as the Game Boy version, but as I mentioned this before, there are some new features have been added, alongside with some quality of life improvements, as well as the forms of, well, anything else potentially. So, for instance, is about the fact that despite the actual the capture footage is still running on 30 frames per second, but when you see the actual game in reality, obviously that is about the fact that it's pretty cool that this game runs really well, likely also for the sake of the forms of 60 frames per second. So yeah, that's actually pretty swell. And just like the forms of how it does it in the original version of the game, basically though, if you talk to this person right here on the right, basically though, we get ourselves the shield, where unlike the forms of how it does it on the Game Boy / Game Boy Color version, well, basically, though, is about the fact, did you remember about the fact that with the item inventory system is actually, like, well, you have to deal with less buttons to work with on the Game Boy / Game Boy Color version? Well, I'm happy to report is that the Switch remake does manage to able to include not only more buttons, but the item inventory system is much better than the forms of how it does it on the Game Boy / Game Boy Color versions now. Like, for instance, if we press the R button or the ZR button, as you can tell, you can now activate the shield. So naturally speaking now, you don't have to worry about just trying to able to keep on changing things around when it comes to the forms of the weapon or item inventory. So yeah, that's actually a massive improvement over the forms of how it does in the original version. So anyway, and you probably already realized about the fact that we've once again meet up with the forms of some familiar characters in Koholint Island, as you can tell. But this time around though, as you can tell, since we're onto the Nintendo Switch system rather than Game Boy or NES or Super Nintendo, as you can tell, there's a lack of screen scrolling this time around when it comes to transition if you manage to go into the next area. So, as a result, no matter what though, is about the fact that at least, thankfully though, much like the forms of how it does it on, let's say the original version of the game or something, that if you do manage to pause the game, then obviously though you can able to actually access to the map function. So either way though, and of course, just like the original version, we do need to able to get ourselves a glorious sword, so naturally we can able to actually start to be doing some wildlife exploration. As well as from that, every once in a while though is about the fact that this owl thing right there decides to able to tell us where we're supposed to go next. Meaning about the fact that it's like a guide of any sort. So just to ensure for the fact that if you find yourself not knowing where to go next, well obviously though is about the fact that you can obviously manage to able to try to, well, it's hard for me to explain, because I know for the fact that the last time I actually played this remake, actually, was back in during the forms of been a lockdown, at least for I've noticed something like this, especially because, well, relatively speaking, though, is about the fact that the reason why we've decided able to do this game for you guys, not just because about the fact that we can able to do a Zelda game for this year, but it's also straight to the point that you probably already know about the fact that the next Zelda game is going to be on its way, which is of course The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom for the Nintendo Switch will be on its way during at some point until next month. And in fact, no matter what though, I've recently did manage to able to pre-order the game just recently. So because of that though, unfortunately though, I don't seem to able to actually get myself the pre-order bonus items or anything else like that, because obviously though, once again, I managed to able to actually got the game pre-ordered on a specific website, which is of course Amazon, just because, you know, I just really can't help it for myself about the fact that certain Nintendo Switch games are in a pretty reasonable price for brand new sealed copies or something like that. Well, beggars can't be choosers, I guess. Although I was expecting to try to get myself this very cool scroll thing, but as a result, I just couldn't afford to do that. So, oh well though. And not to mention though is about the fact that I'm still basically excited to able to actually try out the next Zelda game once that particular game comes out. So I figure it might be a perfect opportunity to able to actually play this game. So just to ensure for the fact that, well, you probably already realized about the fact that the game's visual style is actually very similar to this game right here as we're currently playing through right now, for the sake of the forms of, you know, on the road to celebrating the release of Echoes of Wisdom, except the fact that we're going to be playing as Zelda this time around as opposed to Link. So, anyways though, so just like the forms of how it does on the previous Zelda games, since technically The Legend of Zelda A Link to the Past, basically though is about the fact that we can once again able to start being able to be collecting those heart pieces, and if you do manage to collect 4 of them, then obviously though you can able to increase one of your hearts into your heart container. So, and of course, just like the forms of how it does on the original Game Boy version, alongside with the Game Boy Color version most likely, that is filled to the brim with a lot of familiar references from other Nintendo properties. Like for instance, we see that familiar dog, this almost represents Chain Jump from the Mario series. And on top of all that stuff though, there's plenty of more references we can able to actually discover across. Well, straight to the point about the fact that the last time we actually did technically play The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening into our channel actually, was back in Journey Bombs Event 2022, but that was on the Game Boy Color version, thanks to Tiana, did already tackle for that particular version of the game, just because obviously though we couldn't be bothered able to actually go for the original Game Boy version, just because obviously though one of those dungeons in particular was not accessible on the OG Game Boy version, and as a result, you probably already know why, and so whenever we discuss more about it, during at some point within every single Tuesdays and Thursdays for these uploading schedules department. So also, those of you probably wondering about the fact that what the weather condition is right now, geez Louise, it's actually going to get a lot more hotter at this rate. I mean, we're still in summer, of course. So anyway, of course, just like the forms of how it does in the original version of the game, obviously though you can able to actually buy specific items by utilizing those rupees. And as a result, rupees are yet again currency, just like the forms of how it does on the previous Zelda games, except Zelda 2, because that was entirely a different game altogether. So, but anyway, a few things I want to talk about is, before we're able to actually get into the forms of some other things worth noting for, is that, well, today's date, of course, there is the 13th of August today, in some cases in 2024 today. So generally speaking, though, it's about the fact that, I can't even believe by saying this, it's about the fact that we're getting pretty close to the halfway point in terms of the forms of 2024's August month. So because of that, though, now, suffice to say, is about the fact that for those of you probably wondering, that yes indeed, my voice has actually gone a lot more normal now. That's just mainly because I'm feeling much more better now, so I'm very appreciative about that, especially it's concerning for the fact it's a good thing we did somehow watch the Paris Olympic events during the forms of our illness statement. Well, then again, I'm probably not going to talk more about it right now, because, well, we're about to be starting to be doing some fishing, and, oh, what's this? There might be something well hidden on that specific, greeny bits right there. So I suppose we'll just try to able to like cast the actual lure to catch that big fish right there. So suffice to say, it's about the fact that much like the forms of how it does it on the original version of Link's Awakening, or the DX counterpart on the Game Boy Color, you can once again able to actually do some bit of fishing. However, on the Switch remake this time around, you can able to actually do a lot of fishing this time around, because as I mentioned this before, it's about the fact that this version of the game does contain not only new features, but it's also about the fact that, well, you'll see why as we're able to actually get this particular big fish right there. And as a result, it's important to note that we definitely need to, like, try to do this particular, tilting the control stick back quite a few times. Well, not all the time though, because otherwise, if you overdo it, obviously though, the fish will get away, and there's no chance for you to able to actually get that fish again. So, although it's pretty good about the fact that you can able to once again grind as many of those rubies as you could, especially concerning for the fact that, well, you probably get the idea of how the fact that rubies are more important when it comes to buying things, potentially. So, there we go, there's our first fish caught. So, naturally speaking though, depending on what size of the fish you caught, not only does it grant you some even more rubies, but it's also about the fact that we can able to get ourselves the new lore upgrade, which appears to be the medium weight lore. So, that'll be important until specifically for later, and since we somehow managed to experience fishing for the first time, we get ourselves our glorious piece of heart. So, pretty cool though. Especially, not only that though, unlike the forms of how it does it on the original version on the Game Boy / Game Boy Color for the DX version, that normally though is about the fact that when it comes to heart containers, you can only go up to like 14 heart containers, whilst in here though, well, obviously though, I'll explain more about that as soon as we're able to actually start doing a lot of exploration, because for the most part though, if you couldn't tell already, it's about the fact that the first part of this Let's Play is going to be a lot shorter as it seems, but that's just mainly because, as you can see, we got ourselves a familiar item from the likes of The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, as well as the future games in the series as well, which, yes, the remake of Link's Awakening finally able to actually have ourselves the familiar empty bottle, or specifically the fairy bottle, which I fully appreciate about this, especially because unlike the original version of the game, there is no way we can able to actually have fairy bottles or empty bottles essentially to able to actually, like, imagine if you accidentally died and basically though if you run out of your hearts, basically though is about the fact that you can able to revive yourselves automatically if you capture a fairy, and as a result the fairy will able to bring you back to life rather than brings you into the game over, which as a result that's not the case in journey forms of in the original Game Boy version, including the Game Boy Color version of Link's Awakening. So no matter what though, I'm very happy about the fact that they somehow brought back the empty bottles, which unfortunately, we can't utilize those empty bottles for right now, because as you can tell, we did somehow manage to grind as many of those rupees as we could, thanks to catching some bigger fishes, and of course, much like the forms of how it does it on the Game Boy / Game Boy Color versions, once again, you can able to actually try to find the secret seashells. Although, there's actually going to be a lot more secret seashells this time around on the Switch remake, and you see why. As soon as we're able to actually grab ourselves a familiar item, which we'll talk more about that, again, if we decide able to actually do quite a number of things here and there. So, but anyway, so that pretty much does it for the fishing for now on. And let's go ahead and go into this familiar building over there after obtaining some more rupees right there. I think I'm also able to grab, okay, 61 might be enough. And as a result, we can able to return back into this glorious crane game, just like the forms of how it does it in, well, the original Game Boy / Game Boy Color version. But here's the thing about this remake compared to the forms of how it does it for the original Game Boy version. As you can tell about the fact that if you couldn't tell, I'm obviously trying to go after not only the piece of heart right there, but also that familiar Yoshi doll was actually there, and this time around though they're now all in 3D. But here's the thing, if you try to catch something with the crane, or the claw machine, or the claw rather, basically what happens is about the fact that every once in a while, the actual realism physics were able to actually make things a lot more tricky and challenging this time around, and you see why as soon as we're able to actually keep on going back into this place more often. So, yeah, for the most part though, it's about the fact that I did somehow manage to able to caught not only for that particular piece of heart, but also with this glorious Yoshi doll, so we can able to do some item trading, just like the forms of how it does on the previous two versions. So, nothing new from here, apart from the fact that you can able to actually get not only additional rupees, but there's also another shield, which as a result, technically we've already got a shield since the very beginning, so we don't have to necessarily try to worry about that right now. So either way, for now, let's go in and get ourselves the purple rupee, which as a result, it actually gives us about 50 rupees, if I was assuming so anyway. So, although I would have liked able to explain about the forms of what's going on around the world, but honestly folks, it's about the fact that I think it's probably best if I will save that particular topic and join at some point on this Thursday coming up. So, I think that pretty much does it from here. Although, maybe I'm also able to try my best able to actually go after that particular red rupee. Although, the only unfortunate thing about it is that some items is actually placed on the moving platforms. So, yeah, I don't think it's possible I can able to actually get that red rupee, but I'm okay by missing it that much. But regardless of anything else though, is about the fact that, like I said before, we do need to get back into this particular claw machine game more often, because there might be a couple of times where we might able to actually see some plentiful of items there. So anyway, so let's go ahead and pick up the Yoshi doll for one of those item trading side quests. And, of course, just like before, we can able to actually do all sorts of item trading as soon as we're able to continue proceedings for this game. So, and we got ourselves yet another piece of heart. So I believe we've only got about one more piece of heart left until we basically get ourselves the fourth heart. So, and then once you're trying to able to succeed the claw game for the first time, this random kid right there congratulates us for able to actually get ourselves the Yoshi doll, which actually signifies we can now able to actually do some item trading, which it doesn't really matter if you decided able to do it way earlier, or perhaps even maybe later on. Oh, and by the way, something's worth noting for, every time if you move into a next area, or trying to get into the next area I should say, of Koholint Island, there might be a couple of times where the frame rate might drop drop a bit, which is not as pleasant as it seems. But I will say, I really do love the visual style in this game, potentially, even though despite the fact I just accidentally keep on getting hit by that fox right there, but that's just mainly because I accidentally managed able to press the B button by mistake. But regardless of everything else though, much like this sword die, thank goodness we don't have to worry about the constant item switching inventory, which thank goodness for that, because obviously though, just like the shield, the sword is now acted out as a separate button, which appears to be the B button, which, again, I fully appreciate about that. Now, I'm sure about the fact that, well, let me know in the comments down below for the question of the day. Have you guys ever played The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, either on the Game Boy or the Game Boy Color, or even the Switch remake, as a matter of fact? Although, I will say this right now, I honestly really should able to recommend the Switch remake over a bit more than the forms of how it does it on not only the OG Game Boy version, as well as the Game Boy Color version, and you probably understand why. So because of that though, that's just me anyway though, so I suppose with that being said folks, is that we get endings off this point right here. So join me next time for more of Let's Play of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening Switch Remake, is that we're about to be traversing into the mysterious forest. So I'll see you guys until on Thursday. Later fellas.